The glossy paper of the Amex Black Card statement felt unnervingly slick in my hands, a stark contrast to the thick, cloying sensation at the back of my throat. I had been away for 2 weeks, a grueling business trip closing a merger that would set us up for life. I'd come home exhausted but triumphant, ready to surprise Sarah. Instead, the surprise was waiting for me in a crisp black envelope. It started with a charge for a Rolex, a new one. I already owned a Rolex, a gift from my father on my 30th birthday. This one was a different model, a Daytona, priced at a staggering $9,000. Below it, a $2,000 charge for a couple's getaway at a boutique hotel upstate. Then, a string of smaller, yet equally insidious purchases: a bottle of Creed Aventus cologne, a cashmere sweater from Saks, a dinner for two at a Michelin-starred restaurant I'd never even heard of. $12,000 in total. My eyes scanned down to the shipping details for the watch and cologne, my blood turning to ice. The packages hadn't been sent to our address. They'd been sent to a downtown condo belonging to Derek, her colleague, her work friend. A metallic tang, sharp and acidic, flooded my mouth. It was the taste of pure, unadulterated betrayal, a chemical reaction happening deep in my gut. For a moment, the world tilted, the numbers on the page blurring into a meaningless soup of ink and lies. I thought of Sarah's texts from the past week, filled with heart emojis and complaints about how much she missed me during her girls' trip to Miami. She'd sent photos of beaches and cocktails, carefully cropped images of a solo vacation that had clearly been anything but. The getaway package, the romantic dinner, the cologne. It wasn't just theft. It was a narrative. She was building a life with him using my money, piece by treacherous piece, while I was 1,000 miles away building a future I thought was for us. My hands began to shake, a tremor that started in my fingertips and radiated up my arms. It wasn't the trembling of a man on the verge of tears, not the gut-wrenching shudder of heartbreak. It was the vibration of a machine powering on, of a system rebooting with a cold, singular purpose. This wasn't a domestic dispute. It was a hostile takeover. She hadn't just cheated on me. She had declared financial warfare, using my own assets as her munitions. Every dollar she spent was a bullet aimed at the foundation of the life I had built. The shock was already hardening into something else, something cold and crystalline and sharp. Fury. A rage so pure it felt like a force of nature, clearing the fog of sentiment and leaving behind only the stark, ugly clarity of the balance sheet. The clock on the wall seemed to tick louder, each second a hammer blow counting down to her return. According to her last text, her flight from Miami was scheduled to land tomorrow afternoon. 18 hours. 18 hours until she walked through that door, expecting to fall into my arms, her face a perfect mask of loving innocence. 18 hours to dismantle the life she thought she was so cleverly stealing. The game was on, but she didn't know I was playing yet. She thought I was still the trusting husband, the workaholic provider too busy and too foolish to ever look at the details. She was about to learn how wrong she was. With a steadiness that surprised even me, I picked up my phone. My thumb moved with lethal precision, opening the camera app. I laid the statement flat on the granite countertop, the expensive stone we'd picked out together last year, and took a crystal-clear photo of the first page, then the second. I screenshotted every single transaction, every charge, every shipping address. I compiled them into a single, damning folder, a digital dossier of her deceit. For a full minute, I just stared at the icon for the credit card's mobile app, my finger hovering over the button that would allow me to speak to a fraud specialist. The option was there, clean and simple: report fraudulent charges. It wasn't a lie. This was fraud, every definition of the word. And I was about to bring the whole damn house of cards crashing down, My finger didn't hover for long. I pressed the call button. The automated menu was a fresh layer of hell, a robotic voice cheerfully offering options while my life burned down around me. I stabbed 0 until a human came on the line. "Fraud Department. My name is Marcus Thorne," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I need to report a series of fraudulent charges. Cancel all my cards and freeze all joint accounts effective immediately." The representative on the other end, a woman with a patient, practiced voice, walked me through the litany of security questions. My mother's maiden name, the city where Sarah and I had met. Each answer was a small, bitter pill. I read out the charges, one by one. The Rolex, the hotel, the cologne. I gave her Derek's name and the shipping address. "Yes, I know who made the purchases," I said, cutting off her next question. "My wife. But they were made without my consent or knowledge. That is the very definition of fraud." There was a brief pause. On the other end, the sound of furious typing. Within 90 minutes it was done. The black card was dead. The joint checking account was frozen. The 6 figures I'd moved into it last week, the proceeds from the merger, were now sitting in a new, private account under my name alone. I had severed our financial union with the clean digital slice of a wire transfer. The entire process took less than 2 hours. 2 hours to undo 8 years of shared trust. The first volley from her camp arrived an hour later, just as I was deleting her face from my phone's home screen. A text message. "Why isn't my card working? I'm trying to check out of the hotel, and it was declined." A wave of savage satisfaction washed over me. The hotel. Of course. The getaway package was for this weekend. She wasn't in Miami. She was upstate with him, living it up on my dime right now. The timeline clicked into place with sickening precision. She was planning to fly back tomorrow, just as she'd said, but from a local airport, not from Florida. The girl's trip was the perfect cover. I typed out my reply, my thumbs moving with surgical precision, each letter a small, sharp twist of the knife. I didn't accuse, I didn't yell, I simply redirected her query to the appropriate party. "Ask Derek. He'll explain the charges." I hit send without a moment's hesitation. My phone immediately began to ring, her picture flashing on the screen. I silenced it and set the phone face down on the counter. Let her panic. Let her wonder. Let her ask him why the money tap had suddenly run dry. This was only the beginning. The credit card statement was the obvious wound, the gushing artery of her betrayal. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this wasn't the start of it. This was just where she got sloppy. Fueled by this cold conviction, I logged into our main bank account, the one we used for household expenses, the one I topped up every month without a second thought. I filtered the transaction history, searching for Derek's name. Nothing came up. Clever. Then I searched for his address. Still nothing. But she wouldn't have used wire transfers. They were too obvious. I started scrolling back, month by month, looking for a pattern. And then I found it. Small, steady withdrawals. $500 here, $1,000 there. Sent via Zelle to a username I didn't recognize. DKing88. A quick social media search confirmed it. Derek's profile picture grinned back at me, his arm draped around a smiling Sarah in a photo from last Christmas I'd never seen. The transactions went back 8 months. 8 months of her systematically siphoning money from our shared accounts. My eyes landed on a transfer from 6 weeks ago for exactly $250, the same day I had given her cash for our anniversary dinner. The note on the transfer read, "For the best night." She had used the money I gave her to celebrate our marriage to fund her affair. The rage I felt earlier was a distant echo, replaced by a profound, chilling emptiness. The ringing from my phone was incessant now. A string of missed calls from her, followed by a text. "Marcus, what did you do? Call me now." I ignored it. Words were her weapon of choice, the tool she used to spin lies, and craft false narratives. I would stick to action. I walked to the hall closet and pulled out the empty suitcases we stored there. Then I went to our bedroom, the room we had painted together, and began to pack her things. I worked with a detached, methodical efficiency. Her designer clothes, the ones I'd bought her shoes, her makeup, her jewelry, except for the wedding ring I'd left pointedly on her nightstand. I packed the framed photos of us from her side of the bed. I packed the books she was reading. I packed everything that was uniquely hers, leaving behind only the things we had acquired together, now tainted monuments to a shared life that had been a lie. As I zipped the last suitcase, her frantic calls were still lighting up my phone's screen. She would be at the airport soon, trying to get a flight home, realizing she was locked out of not just her money, but her entire life. I dragged the suitcases to the front door, then called a 24-hour locksmith. By the time he was finished, the tumblers in the lock were new, and the old keys, her keys, were nothing more than useless pieces of metal. Finding Derek's condo had been laughably easy. The shipping address on the credit card statement was all I needed. I'd been parked across the street for an hour, the engine off, the December chill seeping through the windows of my car. The streetlights cast long, skeletal shadows on the pavement, and the occasional pedestrian hurried past, collars turned up against the wind. I was patient. My rage had cooled and settled into a dense, heavy weight in my chest, a source of fuel rather than fire. I knew she would come here. With her cards canceled and the locks on our house changed, where else could she go? This was her new life, after all. She might as well start living it. Right on cue, a taxi pulled up to the curb. Sarah scrambled out, dragging the 2 suitcases I had so meticulously packed for her. She looked frantic, her hair a mess, her face pale and drawn in the harsh yellow light of the condo's entryway. She didn't even glance at my car, her focus entirely on the door in front of her. She stabbed at the buzzer, once, twice, then a third time. When there was no answer, she started pounding on the door with the flat of her hand, the dull thuds echoing in the quiet street. It was a pathetic, desperate sound. The sound of a queen arriving at a castle she'd been promised, only to find the drawbridge pulled up. The door finally swung open, spilling warm light onto the stoop. Derek stood there, shirtless, wearing a pair of low-slung jeans. He looked annoyed at first. Then his expression softened as he saw her face. He pulled her into an embrace, a comforting gesture that turned my stomach. They spoke for a few moments, his hand rubbing her back. I watched as she gesticulated wildly, her voice too faint to hear, but her panic palpable even from 50 feet away. Then, her head snapped in my direction. Her eyes widened, a flicker of genuine fear in them before it was replaced by indignant fury. She pointed toward my car. Derek's head followed her finger, and his body tensed. He pulled away from her, said something sharp, and strode purposefully down the walkway, straight toward me. This was it, the countermove. I calmly rolled down my window, letting the frigid air blast my face. He stopped a few feet away, crossing his arms over his bare chest as if the cold couldn't touch him. "You've got a lot of nerve showing up here," he snarled, his voice a theatrical bellow. "What the hell is your problem? Stalking her? Canceling her cards? That is financial abuse, man. I've already told her to call the cops, and if you don't leave right now, I'm calling them myself. You're harassing her." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, savoring the sheer, unadulterated idiocy of his speech. He was playing the valiant protector, the noble hero rescuing the damsel from her oppressive husband. He had no idea he was just the patsy, the overconfident fool who'd been caught holding the bag. I gave him a slow, pitying smile. "Harassment? Is that what she told you this was?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "You think this is harassment? Wait until my lawyer sees the embezzlement charges." The word hung in the cold air between us, heavy and sharp. Derek's bravado wavered for a split second, a flicker of confusion crossing his face before the mask of arrogance slammed back into place. He actually laughed, a short, barking sound. Embezzlement? Are you insane? You can't embezzle from your own marriage. She's your wife, not your employee. He took a step closer, leaning down as if to intimidate me, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl. She has a right to that money. It's a partnership. You should be thanking her for putting up with a guy who's never even around. The breathtaking ignorance of his statement almost made me laugh for real. He was spouting a script Sarah had fed him, a narrative of a lonely wife and an absentee husband that justified everything. They had built their entire affair on a foundation of my perceived neglect and stupidity. It was time to demolish that foundation. You're right. Marriage is a partnership, I conceded, letting him think he'd scored a point. And partnerships, especially partnerships worth what ours is, are built on agreements, contracts. I watched his face, enjoying the slow dawning of incomprehension. You should have asked her about the prenup before you started playing with my money. Check the prenup, genius. Joint accounts require joint consent for any and all purchases over $500. Every single charge she made for you, the watch, the hotel, the clothes, is a direct violation of a legally binding contract. That's not a marital spat. That's theft. That's fraud. That's embezzlement. His face went slack. The smug certainty drained away, leaving behind a pasty, bewildered look. He was processing the words, prenup, consent, fraud, and they were not computing with the fantasy Sarah had sold him. He was no longer the hero of this story. He was an accomplice. You're bluffing, he stammered, but the conviction was gone. He was grasping at straws, his eyes darting back toward Sarah, who was hovering anxiously on the steps. You're bluffing. She said you never read legal documents. She said you just sign whatever the lawyers put in front of you. And there it was, the fatal miscalculation. The core of their entire plan, spoken aloud by her idiot lover. They didn't just think I was absent. They thought I was stupid. They banked on it. They leveraged my supposed ignorance to steal from me, to build their sordid little kingdom on my life's work. A gust of wind whipped down the street, cutting through the silence. It flattened Derek's designer jacket, the one I'd paid for, against his suddenly very cold-looking chest. He shivered, and for the first time looked less like a threat and more like what he was, a thief who had just been caught. The next morning, I was sitting in the sterile, wood-paneled office of my lawyer, a man named Mr. Harrison, whose demeanor was as sharp and unforgiving as the creases in his suit. The adrenaline from the previous night's confrontation had subsided, replaced by the grim reality of the task ahead. I had walked him through the events of the last 24 hours. The credit card statement, the 8 months of secret transfers, the prenup clause, and the pathetic scene outside Derek's condo. Harrison listened impassively, his fingertips steepled, his expression unreadable. He made a few notes on a yellow legal pad, the scratching of his fountain pen the only sound in the room. When I finished, he nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the file in front of him, which contained the prenuptial agreement I had forwarded earlier that morning. The credit card charges are clear-cut, he said, his voice a dry rasp. The $500 limit on non-consensual spending is an ironclad clause. She violated it repeatedly. The Zelle transfers are further proof of a pattern of deceit. In a divorce proceeding, this gives you immense leverage. We can argue for a significant deviation from the standard 50/50ths split based on dissipation of marital assets. It was good news, but it felt hollow. This wasn't about getting a better settlement anymore. This was about justice. I want to press charges, I stated flatly. The embezzlement, the fraud. I don't just want to divorce her, I want her held accountable. Harrison held up a hand. We can certainly file a criminal complaint, Marcus, and the evidence is strong, but I had my team do a preliminary check on your major assets this morning, just to ensure there were no other... surprises. It's standard procedure when we suspect financial malfeasance. He slid a folder across the polished mahogany desk toward me. We ran a title search on your primary residence. I frowned. Why? The house is in my name. It was a premarital asset, fully protected by the prenup. He nodded again. It is, which is why I found this particularly alarming. I opened the folder. Inside was a document from the county clerk's office, dated 2 months prior. It was an application. A loan application, secured against my property. A second mortgage, for $200,000. My heart, which I thought had already been turned to stone, began to hammer against my ribs. I never applied for this, I whispered, my voice hoarse. I would never leverage the house. Harrison's eyes were filled with a kind of weary sympathy. I know, he said gently. The loan was approved, and the funds were disbursed 3 weeks ago. He slid another document across the desk. A bank statement from an account I had never seen before, showing a single deposit of $200,000, followed by a wire transfer of the full amount out of the account the very next day. And then he showed me the application itself. My signature was there, at the bottom of the page. A flawless, elegant forgery that was nearly indistinguishable from my own. I stared at my name, written in my own hand, but not by me. The air left my lungs in a rush. This was a different level of betrayal entirely. The credit cards felt like petty theft in comparison, a crime of opportunity. This was premeditated, calculated, and deeply criminal. This was a grand heist. She had walked into a bank, used our home, my home, as collateral, forged my signature, and stolen $200,000. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. I thought back to 2 months ago. I was in Asia for 3 weeks, closing the most difficult negotiation of my career. She must have planned it then, knowing I would be distracted, unavailable, trusting her to manage things at home. Where did the money go? I asked, my voice barely audible. Harrison already had the answer. He pushed a final piece of paper toward me. It was a bill of sale from a luxury car dealership. A brand-new Porsche Cayman purchased by one Derek Fletcher, paid in full via a cashier's check. She had bought her lover a Porsche with my house. The room began to spin, the wood-paneled walls closing in on me. I felt a volcanic rage building inside me, so immense, so powerful, it threatened to tear me apart from the inside out. I wanted to storm over to that condo, to kick down the door and show them the proof of this grand larceny. I wanted to see their faces when they realized they hadn't just broken a marriage. They had committed a felony that would send them both to prison. Tomorrow. That was my first thought. Tomorrow she would get served with divorce papers that included this. Tomorrow she'd realize the game was over, that she was facing not just the loss of her lifestyle, but the loss of her freedom. The image of her face, crumbling in the face of irrefutable proof, was intoxicating. I pictured her frantic calls to Derek, the blame, the accusations, the terror. It would be a swift and brutal end. But as the initial wave of incandescent fury crested and began to recede, a new thought emerged, cold and sharp as a sliver of ice. What if swift and brutal wasn't enough? What if it was better to let them think they were still in the game? My mind, trained for years to think 3 moves ahead in a boardroom, began to shift from tactics to strategy. Confronting her now would be satisfying, yes, but it would be a quick kill. She would lawyer up, they would coordinate their stories, they would mount a defense. She would play the victim, the spurned wife who made a mistake. What if instead I did nothing? What if I let her believe she was still safe? I looked up at Harrison, the chaos in my mind settling into a new, terrifying calm. My entire plan of attack had just been rendered obsolete. This new information didn't just give me more ammunition, it changed the very nature of the war. She doesn't know we have this, I said, my voice now steady and clear. She and Derek think the worst they're facing is a nasty divorce over some credit card bills and a broken prenup. Harrison watched me, his expression shifting from sympathy to intense focus. He recognized the change in me. "That's correct," he confirmed. "As far as they know, this is still a civil matter." A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It felt alien. "Good," I said. "Then we don't show our hand, not yet." Harrison leaned forward, intrigued. "What are you proposing, Marcus?" he asked. "I'm proposing we let her dig," I explained, the plan crystallizing in my mind as I spoke. "She thinks I'm an idiot who doesn't read legal documents. She thinks her forgery is a secret. Let's let her keep thinking that. Let's let her get comfortable in her lies. Let's give her the chance to lie again, to commit to the story on paper, under oath. Let's give her the chance to perjure herself. When she gets the initial divorce filing, it will only mention the prenup violations. She'll fight it. She'll file a counter-petition demanding half of everything. She'll claim she was a full partner, that the prenup is invalid. And we will let her. We will let her build her entire case on a mountain of lies, with a felony conviction waiting for her at the peak." This was the true reversal. The midpoint of this nightmare wasn't just about discovering the depth of her crime. It was about me adapting to it. I was no longer the man who had frantically canceled his credit cards. I was no longer the man who had triumphantly watched his wife pound on her lover's door. I had evolved. My pain had been forged into a weapon, and I was now prepared to wield it with the patience and precision of a surgeon. The goal was no longer just to win. The goal was total annihilation. I would let her walk into the trap, let her feel confident, even arrogant. I would let her expose every last one of her deceptions, her rationalizations, her crimes. And when she was at her most vulnerable, when she had lied to lawyers and judges, when her entire false narrative was a matter of public record, I would spring the trap. I would present the evidence of the forged mortgage, and her entire world would be incinerated. It was a colder, more cruel path. It required a level of patience and control I didn't know I possessed, but looking at the forged signature on the paper, I knew I could do it. She hadn't just stolen my money. She had stolen my future. Now, I was going to watch her hand back every last cent, along with her own. Patience, I had discovered, was a weapon of exquisite cruelty. For 2 weeks, I followed my lawyer's advice and did nothing. I let the silence fester. I didn't respond to her increasingly frantic texts, which cycled through confusion, anger, and feigned concern. I let her calls go to voicemail, creating a collection of her escalating panic. I knew from Harrison that she had retained a lawyer, a bulldog known for tearing husbands to shreds and fighting prenups with scorched earth tactics. It was perfect. She was behaving exactly as predicted, running to a hired gun, believing this was a battle she could win with aggression and righteous indignation. She was digging. Now it was time to give her another shove. I chose my moment carefully. Midday on a Tuesday. I knew she often ate at her desk, catching up on work during lunch. Her office was in a sleek, glass and steel tower downtown, a temple of corporate ambition where appearances were everything. I walked through the lobby, my tailored suit a suit of armor, the leather briefcase in my hand feeling as heavy as a war chest. It contained 2 documents, the initial divorce petition, citing irreconcilable differences, and a slim black folder. The receptionist at her firm tried to stop me, her smile tight and professional. "I'm sorry, sir. Sarah is in the middle of her workday. Do you have an appointment?" I didn't break my stride. "She'll see me," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. I knew the layout of her office. I'd been there for holiday parties, playing the role of the proud, supportive husband. Her office, a corner suite with glass walls, put her on display like a high-priced acquisition. I saw her before she saw me. She was on the phone, laughing at something, one hand tapping idly on her keyboard. She looked confident, powerful, completely at ease in her domain. The sight of it, the sheer normalcy of her life continuing while mine had been detonated, solidified my resolve. I walked directly to her door and opened it without knocking. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of utter shock. "Marcus? What are you doing here? You can't just—" I ignored her protests, stepping inside and closing the door behind me. I placed the briefcase on her expansive desk, the stark white surface a perfect stage. "We need to talk," I said calmly. She stood up, her back straightening, shifting instantly into fight mode. "There's nothing to talk about, Marcus. My lawyer will be in contact with your lawyer. Now, if you don't mind, I have work to do." I opened my briefcase and slid the divorce petition across the desk to her. She glanced at it with contempt. "You think this scares me?" she scoffed, her voice dripping with derision. "You can't just divorce me and expect me to walk away with nothing. I'll take half of everything you've ever built. I'm entitled to it. I was your partner." I let her words hang in the air, the familiar, hollow ring of entitlement that Derek had so eagerly parroted. Then, I slid the slim black folder next to the petition. "You're right," I said. "You were my partner, and as my partner, you were bound by the terms of our partnership agreement." She eyed the folder with suspicion. "What is that?" she asked. "That," I said, "is a summary of your financial activities for the past 8 months. The credit card statements, the Zelle transfers to D. King 88, the hotel getaways, the Rolex." Her bravado faltered, her face paling slightly, but she held her ground. "That's marital spending. A judge will see it as that." Her confidence was a shield, but I was about to punch right through it. "A judge will see it as fraud," I corrected her. "And so will the board of our marital partnership. Read page 12 of the petition, Sarah. It cites the specific clause in our prenup you seemed to forget about, the one you thought I'd never read." Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the thick document and flipped to page 12. I watched her scan the paragraph, her eyes moving quickly at first, then slowing down, then reading it again. I knew the words by heart. "Any non-consensual transfer or expenditure of marital or premarital assets in excess of $500 shall be considered an act of material fraud, rendering all asset protection clauses within this agreement null and void." Her face, already pale, drained of all remaining color. The shield wasn't just cracked, it was shattered. She dropped the papers on her desk as if they had burned her. "That's impossible," she whispered, her voice a strangled rasp. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it was almost gratifying. "That's impossible. Derek said you'd never find out about the signatures." The slip was monumental. Signatures. Plural. She wasn't just thinking of the credit card slips anymore. Her mind had jumped ahead to the bigger crime, the one she thought was still buried. She had just admitted, implicitly, to forgery. And she had named her accomplice. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a low, unforgiving whisper. "Let me give you some free legal advice. Derek isn't a lawyer. He's the guy you bought with my money. And you, Sarah, are not nearly as clever as you think you are." At that precise moment, her boss, a silver-haired man named Mr. Peterson, walked by her glass-walled office. He glanced in, saw her standing there, white as a sheet, with me looming over her desk like an executioner. He saw the legal documents spread out before her, his brow furrowed with concern, and he gave her a questioning look before moving on. The public humiliation was a new and exquisite turn of the screw. Her professional mask was gone, replaced by the raw panic of a cornered animal, and her colleagues, her superiors, were walking by to witness it all. She sank into her chair, her body seeming to collapse in on itself. "What do you want, Marcus?" she breathed, the fight completely gone from her. I pushed the black folder toward her again. "In that folder is the evidence of fraud sufficient to void our prenup. It is not, however, all the evidence I possess. Not by a long shot." I stood up, my task here complete. I had planted the bomb. Now I just had to set the timer. "You have a choice to make," I said, my voice cold and final as a judge's gavel. "You can accept the terms of the divorce as laid out in that petition. You walk away with nothing but the clothes on your back and what's left in your personal bank account. You sign everything, and the criminal aspect of this disappears. Or you can fight. You can stick with your plan to take me for half. If you choose that path, my lawyer will file a second motion tomorrow morning, complete with evidence of grand larceny and felony forgery that will guarantee you a prison sentence." I paused at her door. "You have until 5 p.m. today to have your lawyer call mine with your decision. Confess and negotiate your freedom, or let me file the criminal charges and destroy what's left of your life. Choose wisely." I walked away without a backward glance, leaving her alone in her glass cage, the ticking clock of the ultimatum, the only sound in her head. The conference room at Harrison's firm was a cathedral of corporate law. A long, dark slab of polished mahogany served as the table, reflecting the cool, recessed lighting from the ceiling. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a view I had worked my entire adult life to be able to afford. Today, it felt like I was looking down on a world I no longer recognized. I sat at the head of the table, with Harrison to my right. To my left sat a woman whose presence was the final piece of my strategy. Nina, my financial advisor for the last decade. She was a woman of sharp angles and sharper intellect, her silver hair cut into a severe, elegant bob. In front of her was a single, thick file, identical to the one in front of me. We were ready. We had been for 15 minutes. The call had come yesterday at 4:58 p.m., just 2 minutes before my deadline expired. Sarah's lawyer, his voice clipped and defeated, had agreed to the meeting. She had chosen to negotiate. She thought she was coming here to surrender. She didn't realize she was walking into a public autopsy of her life. The heavy glass door of the conference room opened, and they walked in. Sarah looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, diminished and swallowed by a plain gray coat. Her eyes were red-rimmed and fixed on the floor, refusing to meet mine. She was the image of contrition. Derek, however, was a different story. He walked in beside her like a bodyguard, his chin held high, radiating a defiant belligerence. And on his wrist, catching the light as he moved, was the Rolex. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. He was wearing the spoils of his victory to the surrender. It was the most eloquent confession he could possibly have made, a silent testament to his arrogance and his stupidity. They took the seats opposite us, the vast expanse of polished wood feeling like a chasm between two warring nations. Sarah's lawyer, a harried-looking man I recognized from his firm's website, began to speak, but I held up a hand. "Let's dispense with the legal posturing," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "I want to hear it from her." All eyes turned to Sarah. She flinched, then took a shaky breath. She finally looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Marcus, I'm sorry," she began, her voice cracking. "I know what I did was wrong. I'll sign the papers. I'll agree to the divorce." She gestured vaguely with her hand. "I'll give back everything if you don't press charges. The money, the things. Just let me walk away, please." Her performance was almost believable, the broken wife begging for mercy. But I wasn't the man she married anymore. I was the man she had created, the one who saw every angle, every lie. I let her plea hang in the air, a pathetic, dying note. Then I leaned forward. "Everything?" I asked, my voice deceptively soft. "That's a very comprehensive offer. Does everything include the $40,000 that was funneled out of my retirement account 3 months ago?" The confusion on her face was immediate, and for the first time since this began, completely genuine. Her brow furrowed. What retirement account?" she asked, looking from me to her lawyer in genuine bewilderment. "I never touched your retirement funds. I wouldn't even know how." She looked at me, a flicker of her old self returning. "I'm not lying, Marcus. I did a lot of things, but I didn't do that. Derek, sensing a crack in my case, puffed out his chest. See? More lies. You're just trying to bully her. I ignored him completely, my gaze locked on Sarah. This was the moment. The checkmate move she never saw coming because she was too busy playing a different game. My plan to let her dig her own grave had been based on the crimes I knew about, but a deep dive by Nina's forensic accounting team had uncovered a new layer of betrayal, one that even Sarah was unaware of. I turned my head slightly. Show them the documents, Nina. Nina, who had been silent and still as a statue, opened her file. With quiet, precise movements, she slid a series of papers across the table. This is a signed authorization form, submitted to Mr. Thorne's investment brokerage 3 months ago, she began, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion. It requests a hardship withdrawal of $40,000, citing urgent home repairs. The signature, you will note, is a near-perfect forgery of Mr. Thorne's. She pushed another document forward. This is the bank record for the transfer. The funds were not sent to your joint account, Mrs. Thorne. They were wired to a newly created holding company. She slid a final page across the table. And this is the articles of incorporation for that company. The sole director and signatory is Mr. Derek Fletcher. The silence in the room was absolute. Sarah stared at the documents, her mouth slightly agape. She looked at the forged signature, then at the company registration with Derek's name on it. Then, very slowly, she turned her head to look at the man sitting next to her. The man wearing a $9,000 watch she had bought him. The man for whom she had risked everything. The look on her face was a spectacular collage of horror, realization, and betrayal. He hadn't just been her lover. He had been robbing both of us, using her access and my absence to bleed me dry in ways she hadn't even known about. He had a secret life, apart from their secret life. Derek's bravado finally evaporated, replaced by a sweaty, panicked pallor. He couldn't meet her eyes. He stared at the papers, his jaw working silently. He had been caught, not just by me, but by her. "She doesn't owe you anything," he finally blurted out, a desperate, pathetic volley. "Marriage is a partnership. We were building a life." I almost pitied him. He was still clinging to the flimsy justification Sarah had built for them, the only defense he had ever known. It was time to put him out of his misery. "Partnerships don't involve forgery, Derek," I said, my voice flat and cold as a tombstone. "They don't involve setting up shell corporations to steal retirement funds. We have a name for that. It's called felony fraud. It carries a sentence of 5 to 7 years in a federal penitentiary, for each count." I let that sink in, watching the last vestiges of fight drain from both of their faces. Sarah looked utterly broken, betrayed not only by me but by the very man she had betrayed me for. Her house of cards hadn't just collapsed. A wrecking ball had smashed through it. I reached into my own file and pulled out the final document. The settlement agreement. It was thick, comprehensive, and utterly brutal. I slid it across the table. It slid to a halt directly in front of Sarah. "You will sign this today," I commanded. "This document relinquishes any and all claim to any asset, property, or fund I have ever owned. You will walk away with the contents of your checking account and nothing else. You will agree to these terms, or my lawyer will walk these files over to the district attorney's office this afternoon. The choice was never about money, Sarah. It was about whether you would spend the next 5 years in court or in a cell." I already knew her answer. She would sign. She would choose freedom, even if it was a life of destitution. The central question of my nightmare was resolved. I was keeping everything. She was leaving with nothing. And as her trembling hand reached for the pen, I realized I was finally truly free. 6 months. Half a year is a surprisingly long time. It's long enough for wounds to scar over, for lawyers to file final papers, and for the echoes of a former life to finally fade. The house, the one I had built and she had leveraged, was sold. I couldn't stand to walk its halls, to see the ghosts of her lies in every room. The proceeds, along with the recovered funds from her various thefts, formed the foundation of my new world. That new world was 40 floors up, a downtown loft with floor-to-ceiling windows that drank in the evening sun. The city skyline, a glittering tapestry of ambition and light, was a view I actually owned now, not just one I paid the mortgage on. There were no shared memories here, no ghosts. Every piece of furniture, every book on the shelves was chosen by me, for me. It was a space defined not by a partnership, but by a singular, hard-won peace. I was sitting at a sleek, minimalist dining table, which currently served as our war room. Across from me was Nina, her laptop open, a series of complex charts and projections glowing on the screen. We were reviewing my new investment portfolios, mapping out the next 5 years. It was a quiet, focused collaboration, the kind of partnership I had once thought marriage was supposed to be, built on mutual respect, clear goals, and absolute trust. We were talking about emerging tech markets when my phone, lying face up on the table, buzzed. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. Sarah. The message was short. A pathetic flare sent from a ship that had long since sunk. Derek left me for someone with money. I read the words without a change in expression. There was no surge of triumph, no satisfying rush of schadenfreude. There was only a profound, quiet sense of inevitability. Of course he had. His entire character was transactional. He had been purchased, and when a better offer came along, he had simply allowed himself to be sold. It was the natural conclusion to their sordid little business arrangement. Some people are incapable of seeing others as anything but resources to be exploited. She had seen me as a bank, and he had seen her as a stepping stone. A perfect, self-consuming ecosystem of greed. Nina noticed my pause. "Everything all right, Marcus?" she asked, her eyes sharp but not intrusive. I pushed the phone slightly toward her so she could see the message. She read it, and the corner of her mouth twitched in a rare, small smile. "The best revenge, as they say," she murmured, before turning her attention back to the screen in front of her. "Now, regarding the venture capital fund..." She didn't dwell on it because it didn't matter. It was old news, a closed account, a bad investment that had finally been written off. We went back to work, our conversation a steady, calming rhythm of numbers and strategy, the language of building things up rather than tearing them down. We were discussing risk allocation when the phone buzzed again. Another message from Sarah. I saw the preview light up. "I have nothing. I don't know what to do," before the screen went dark. This time I didn't even acknowledge it. It was just noise from a distant, irrelevant world. Her desperation was no longer my currency. Her problems were no longer my concern. She had made a series of choices, believing herself to be a master strategist in a game of emotional chess. But she'd forgotten the most important rule. You can't cheat a man who is willing to burn the entire board down to get rid of you. Later that evening, after Nina had left, I stood by the immense window, a glass of scotch in my hand, watching the city breathe below me. The sun was gone, replaced by millions of electric stars in the buildings that stretched to the horizon. I thought about the rage that had fueled me, the cold, methodical fury that had saved me. It had served its purpose, but it was a heavy thing to carry. I had set it down now. It was replaced by something lighter, something cleaner. The thieves of the world, the Sarahs and the Dereks, never understand that what they take is never as valuable as what the victim gains in their absence. They steal money, but they give you clarity. They take your trust, but they give you resilience. They think they're robbing you of a future, but they're merely freeing you from a compromised past. The best revenge isn't living well to spite them. It's living well because they are no longer a part of your life to begin with. The scotch was smooth, the air was still, and the silence in my loft was complete. It was the sound of my own life, bought and paid for. Freedom, I decided, tasted infinitely better than any marriage ever did.